My wife left, returned with a baby, and begged me for another chance. Can you imagine building your entire future with someone, only for them to vanish into thin air? Then, years later, they reappear on your doorstep, holding a baby that isn't yours, demanding a second chance. My wife did just that, and what happened next still sends shivers down my spine. They say I never saw it coming, but for me, it was truly like a punch to the gut. For 4 years, I was married to the woman I thought was my soulmate. Honestly, I believe we were doing great. We had dreams, plans, a whole life blueprint laid out, especially when it came to children. We talked endlessly about names, nursery decor, whether we'd have 2 or 3. It was our thing, browsing baby clothes online, imagining our future family. Everything felt perfect, and we were so ready for that next chapter. But then our world shattered. After months of trying to conceive, we went to the doctor, desperate for answers. The news hit me like a physical blow. It was me. My count was too low. Our chances of natural conception were incredibly slim. All those dreams, all those plans, just evaporated. I felt utterly worthless, completely gutted. For a while, I spiraled, a total wreck, until therapy slowly, painstakingly, brought me back. At first, she seemed supportive. She'd say, "It doesn't matter, darling, I'm happy with just us." But even then, something fell off. It was too quick, too sudden. 1 minute, she was planning our family. The next, she was claiming children didn't matter. I get that people change their minds, but her whole demeanor shifted. The baby name stopped. Any conversation about kids became an immediate avoidance tactic. Worse, she started looking at me differently. Little jabs began out of nowhere. "You're not taking care of yourself," or "maybe you should work out more." Yes, I'd gained a few pounds, but it felt like she was actively looking for reasons to criticize me. When I asked about the sudden change, she'd dismiss it, saying I was too sensitive or just imagining things. But I knew. This wasn't the woman I married, the one who'd spend hours dreaming with me. There was a coldness, a distance, as if she'd mentally checked out, just going through the motions. Over time, I suppose I started believing her when she said everything was fine. I stopped pushing, scared of looking needy or insecure. And so, our marriage just existed. Years passed. We were just coexisting, more like housemates than husband and wife. Every time I tried to talk about other options, adoption, surrogacy, she'd shut me down. "I don't want to consider them," she'd say. "I'm happy as long as we're together." But I never truly believed her. It felt like she was trying to convince herself more than me. Then, she announced a girls' trip to America. She'd gone on trips with friends before, and I always encouraged it. We lived in Brighton, and she'd been talking about this for a while. We'd built years of trust, or so I thought, so I didn't think twice. I made sure she had everything, helped her pack, and drove her to the airport. I remember her last words as she turned to me before going through security. "Thank you for being so supportive." It sounded so sincere, yet strangely out of place. I hadn't done anything extraordinary, just been a husband. I brushed it off, thinking she was just grateful. I stayed up that night, anxious, calling her when her flight landed. 9 hours later, I saw her flight had touched down. I called, but it just rang and rang. No answer. I figured she was exhausted, probably went straight to the hotel and crashed. But by morning, still nothing. A cold dread started to creep in. I tried again, texts, more calls. Hours of radio silence. I was officially freaking out. Finally, I called her sister. Nothing. Panic seized me. I even called the friends she was supposedly traveling with. Maybe her phone broke. Maybe she just hadn't checked in. But they were equally confused. They weren't with her. They were home, having coffee 2 streets away. That's when it hit me. She wasn't on a girls' trip. She wasn't with anyone. She had just vanished. My stomach dropped through the floor. I sat there, phone in hand, completely numb. Why the lie? Why leave without a word? I tried to rationalize it. A misconnection, an emergency. But deep down I knew. This was planned. Her "thank you for your support," the elaborate girls' trip story, it was all part of whatever twisted fantasy she'd been living. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. This wasn't the woman I married. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she'd stopped talking about our future, those subtle digs about my appearance, it all suddenly made sense. I just hadn't seen it, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see how far she drifted away. That night, I just stared at my phone, hoping for a call, a text, anything. But nothing came. And in my heart, I knew it wouldn't. The next morning, I woke up, still half expecting it to be a dream. But her side of the bed was empty. She was gone. She packed her things and disappeared. It was a devastating chapter, one I never thought I'd live through. By the way, if you're still with me, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. There are more unbelievable stories coming, and your support means the world. The first few days were pure denial. I called her phone repeatedly, hoping to hear her voice, hoping for an explanation. I left desperate messages, half of them incoherent. But only silence answered, and that, somehow, was worse. It felt like I'd been a stranger to her all along, left to pick up the pieces with no clue what went wrong. Her family was as shocked as I was. Her mother knew nothing. I practically lived at her mom's house, begging for answers. Her mother, bless her, would cook for me, let me stay when I couldn't bear to be alone. She'd listen as I replayed every tiny detail, trying to make sense of how my life had shattered so completely. Some days, I was too numb to even speak. I swung between rage, despair, and crushing remorse. What went wrong? Did I miss a sign? Was I not paying enough attention? I'd replay every argument, every conversation, searching for the trigger, the thing I could have done better to save us. It sounds dramatic, I know, but I was fixated, desperate for a solution, as if it would magically fix everything. I barely slept, barely ate. My work suffered. People noticed, asked if I was okay. I just mumbled, personal matters. The shame of admitting my wife had abandoned me, without a word, was unbearable. Eventually, I confided in a few close friends. They tried to distract me, to help me move on, but even with them, I'd still wonder where she was, why I hadn't been enough. The worst part was the endless questions from strangers, neighbors, old colleagues. How's married life? How's your wife? Each time was like ripping off a fresh scab. I'd force a smile, say everything's good, but every life felt heavier than the last. Finally, therapy became my lifeline. I'd never been before, but after months of barely functioning, I knew I couldn't do it alone. My therapist was a neutral voice, someone without baggage, and I poured out all my rage, betrayal, the gaping void she'd left. All those restless nights, replaying everything. The therapist helped me see. Her leaving was her choice, not mine. There was no magic moment I could have created to keep her. That was a bitter pill to swallow. For so long, I believed I was fundamentally flawed. That's why she left. But slowly, I started to see things differently. I had ignored her coldness, her distance, hoping it would fix itself. I convinced myself I could save our marriage by myself, realizing it wasn't my burden to carry, truly hurt, but it was also liberating. Slowly, in tiny increments, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't until she left that I realized how much I'd lost of myself in our marriage. I'd always been the one trying hardest to make her happy. Now, I had endless free time and no idea how to fill it. So, I picked up old hobbies, cooking, the gym, reading books I'd put off for years. My work, which had suffered, began to improve. I started pouring myself into it, not just going through the motions. It was one of the few areas where I still felt control, a sense of accomplishment. I'd always been good at my job, but now I gave it everything. The extra hours, the focus, it led to a promotion, something I never would have achieved if I'd stayed moping. Of course, there were still painful days. A photograph, an old movie ticket, small things would trigger memories, and I'd wonder what she was doing, if she ever thought of me, if she felt any remorse. But those moments started to fade, becoming less frequent, easier to let go of. I reconnected with friends I'd barely seen since getting married. We hiked, went golfing, things I hadn't done in years. Having someone by my side who wasn't caught in the mess, who could support me without dragging me back into the pain, was such a relief. Looking back, I realized I'd invested too much of myself into being her spouse. When she left, it felt like she'd taken a piece of me. But piece by piece, I was rediscovering who I was. It wasn't quick or easy, but I was making progress. By the end of that year, I finally looked in the mirror and saw someone who wasn't defined by her absence. I wasn't just the man whose wife abandoned him. I had rebuilt. I had survived. I was stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like I could truly live my life without her shadow. And honestly, I took immense pride in that. I thought I had moved on. Life, after all that chaos, had finally started to feel normal again. My work was thriving, my friends kept me busy, my routine was solid. Even the daily thoughts of her had stopped. Sure, an odd memory would flash back, but she wasn't intertwined with every aspect of my existence anymore. So, she was the absolute last person I expected to see when someone knocked on my door that Saturday morning. But there she was, standing right on my doorstep with a baby in her arms. My blood ran cold. It was like seeing a ghost. My brain just stopped. She looked familiar, a little worn down, but still her. And she was smiling at me, as if she genuinely believed I'd be thrilled to see her. The nerve. After everything. She just shows up, expecting open arms. Yes, it got to me. All those feelings I'd suppressed came rushing back. I just stood there, staring. No words. She broke the silence. "Can I come in?" she asked, completely unashamed. Unbelievable. But I held my ground. "No. You can stay right there and explain." I wasn't letting her bring her chaos back into the sanctuary I'd painstakingly built. She stayed put, looking a little disoriented, and started her story. I know this might come as a shock, but I wanted to come back, to explain everything. A hopeful look on her face, like she truly thought I'd listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh, but a morbid curiosity held me captive. I needed to hear it. She went on, saying she'd made a mistake, realized she'd lost the greatest thing that ever happened to her. Her words, not mine. She claimed this child had made her reflect, finally understand what was important. After years of ignoring me, the most important thing had apparently just knocked on my door. "This is our second chance," she declared, glancing down at the baby. A second chance. It sounded like she expected us to just pick up where we left off, with this child as some miraculous reset button. Inside, I was seething, but I kept my face neutral. She continued, talking about us being a family again, how she'd made a horrible mistake, but now we could start over, just the three of us. My one burning question, the one that had tormented me for years, finally escaped my lips. "What made you go?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold myself together. I needed to hear it from her, finally. She hesitated, glancing down at her feet, a flicker of something like embarrassment. Then, she told me the truth, or at least, her version of it. She left because she wanted a child, and she found someone who could give her one. "Because you couldn't," she added, as if it were a minor detail, as if she hadn't shattered my entire world, as if I should just nod along. She explained the man she left me for hadn't stayed, but by then, she'd had the baby, and she knew she wanted me back. Simple as that. Easy. I just stood there, letting it sink in. She was confessing she'd abandoned me, run off with another man, had his child, and now expected me to just forgive and forget? You went, met someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can just return and act like nothing happened? I asked, the word sharp. She started crying, apologizing for her terrible error. But I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. She kept babbling about how she knew we were meant to be, how I was the person she really loved. Honestly, it was hard to keep a straight face. She sounded so naive, so desperate. Not love, just desperation. Then, she tried to guilt-trip me, endlessly droning on about how hard it had been as a single mother. She actually tried to paint herself as the victim, as if her own choices hadn't brought her to this point. She was ready to work things out this time, she insisted, and she wanted my help. Who did she think I was? I listened to it all, standing my ground. But I'd had enough. "You have to live with the decision you made a long time ago," I told her, my voice clear and firm. "There is no second chance here." She looked utterly astonished, as if she'd never even considered I'd say no. As if she truly believed she could just waltz back into my life. Just when I thought she might finally get it and leave, she erupted. She grew furious, accusing me of selfishness, demanding I give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say she could have taken half of everything and divorced me back then if she'd wanted, that the house should still belong to her. A strange sense of relief washed over me. This was her true colors, finally revealed. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. We're done, I simply stated, looking her dead in the eye. You finally have the life you've always desired. I no longer have responsibility for this. And then, I closed the door in her face. A peculiar serenity settled over me. I could hear her muffled shouting, her pounding on the door. She could scream, she could knock, she could weep. But I knew I would never let her back in. The woman I married and loved was long gone. This stranger, who thought she could pick up the pieces whenever it suited her, had taken her place. Lighter than I'd felt in years, I moved away from the door and sat down. I thought that was it. I shut the door. I figured she'd understand, walk away. Instead, the pounding intensified. Her shouts grew louder. The sheer nerve to stand there on my porch, in the one place I'd found sanctuary from the wreckage she'd left, demanding I listen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let her scream herself hoarse. But then, curiosity got the better of me. What new excuses would she conjure up now? I opened the door slightly, just enough to show I was listening, but not enough to let her in. She looked stunned, as if I'd slapped her. As if this was just a typical argument, not a confrontation about her abandonment. She launched into a lengthy monologue, actually saying she was willing to forgive me for closing the door and wanting to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A genuine, startled laugh. This woman truly had more nerve than anyone I'd ever met. My laughter enraged her. She looked furious, as if I should feel guilty for not taking her seriously. You left, I told her, my voice firm. You tossed everything away when you had the chance. I won't just act as though nothing occurred because you want me to. Her cheeks flushed. You don't understand how hard it was for me, she started repeating, talking about how lost she'd been, how she'd realized her error too late. But I didn't believe a word. You made the decision to leave, I reminded her. You plotted it, made up a lie, and then you carried it out. Your remorse means nothing now. That's when she completely lost her temper. The sad, repentant act vanished. She attacked me, accusing me of being unfair, of lacking the grace to give her another chance. She actually dared to say, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have stolen half your possessions. I just stood there, dumbfounded. This woman, who abandoned me without a word, now expected a medal for not financially ruining me? As if she deserved praise for not being as awful as she could have been? What the heck? I asked her, shaking my head. Should I feel thankful that you simply left me without taking anything? Her face was a mix of fury and something else, desperation, maybe regret. But honestly, by then I didn't care. I was done. All those years I'd spent questioning myself, feeling inadequate, wondering if I was to blame, they all vanished in that moment. Seeing her for who she truly was lifted a monumental weight from my shoulders. But she wasn't finished. She began pacing my porch, complaining that I'd regret not giving her another chance, that I'd never find someone like her. She tried to make me feel like I was the one missing out. It was bizarre, as if I should be begging her to stay. She was the one who destroyed everything we had. She grew louder, then tried to blame me for her leaving in the first place, saying none of this would have happened if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her twisted logic was that I'd failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her running off to have a child with someone else. The mental gymnastics were astounding. I was shocked she was still trying to blame me for her choices. Look, I told her bluntly, if you really wanted a child, you could have told me the truth when you were making plans to go. You didn't need to lie and act like nothing was wrong. She just stared at me, speechless, as if I'd slapped her. But I wasn't done. You have to live with the decision you made on your own. I have no problem with that. She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, urging me to consider the boy, saying I was being unjust by ignoring him. She actually used the child in her arms to guilt-trip me. But I wasn't buying it. I don't know that child, I informed her, my voice unwavering. I'm not involved with him. You are not mine, and neither is he. That was it. I could see it finally click. She knew I wouldn't change my mind. She knew I would never let her back into my life. The rage on her face faded, replaced by something else, perhaps genuine regret, or just sheer exasperation. But I didn't care. She had tried to walk all over me, expected me to smile and thank her, but now she was simply a stranger. She stood there for a few more seconds, as if waiting for me to call her back. I said nothing else. As the realization finally hit her, I just watched her expression. Then, without another glance, I closed the door. This time, I didn't wait for her to hit it again. In my heart, I knew my decision was final. There was no turning back. I walked away from that door feeling as though I had finally prevailed. It was over. All those years she'd spent hoping to return, trying manipulation to get back into my life, it was done. I had my freedom. There would be no second chance, not for her, not for us. She was now just a memory, one I had, at long last, relegated to the past. After all those years of suffering and shame, I felt like I could breathe again. And you know what? It felt good. A peculiar calmness settled over me the moment I shut that door. No more sadness, no more fury, not even shock. All the remorse, the guilt, the incessant wondering I had felt for her over the years, simply evaporated. I had found the closure I didn't even realize I needed. This time, it was truly over. Naturally, though, things weren't entirely smooth sailing. A few days later, her mother texted me. She apologized, embarrassed by her daughter's actions, saying she tried to reason with her. Her mother was a good woman. She'd been a huge help after her daughter left, and I could tell she was genuinely distressed. I had nothing against her, but I refused to be drawn back in. "Thanks for checking in," was my only reply. I wasn't going to justify my choice, or offer her mother any more details. She understood it was over. Over the next few weeks, I picked up tidbits through social media and mutual connections. Apparently, she'd moved back in with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she'd left me for, had completely bailed. He hadn't committed long-term, leaving her to figure things out alone. Few people were eager to help her, as she'd essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, the ones who supported me when she first vanished, felt no sympathy. They'd all moved on, not wanting to be dragged back into her drama. You couldn't blame them. Even her parents weren't happy. They struggled financially to support her and the child. I knew this because her father called me shortly after her mother's text. Curiosity almost made me not answer. He spoke politely but directly, mentioning their financial difficulties and implying I might be able to assist. He went on about the infant, how hard things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but internally chuckle. Not out loud, but you get the idea. When he started explaining his daughter just needed a little help to get back on her feet, I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions, and I was neither in a position nor the right frame of mind to help. He didn't push it further. I think he understood the message. Then, people I hadn't spoken to in years started contacting me. Some tried the guilt angle, claiming she was going through a tough time, suggesting I find it in my heart to give her another chance. One even had the audacity to say the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my resentment stand in the way. But I refused to back down. I wouldn't let anyone guilt-trip me into her mess. I had given that woman everything, for years, always feeling inadequate, and she'd thrown it all away. She needed to take responsibility for her decisions, not rely on me to save her. Gradually, the calls and messages dwindled, then stopped completely. Everyone, it seemed, finally realized I was serious. I had moved on, and I wouldn't be ensnared again. That's when true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life felt genuinely normal. I had my friends, my job, my routines. It wasn't a fancy, glamorous life, but it was mine, rebuilt on my own terms. The irony was, I started rediscovering joy in small things again, things I'd barely thought about when I was married. Reading books, cooking my own food, taking walks. It felt good to be free, to live my life as I pleased, without needing anyone's approval. For once, I wasn't constantly concerned about someone else's happiness or validation. I felt like I had gradually, completely regained my life. Occasionally, I'd run into someone who knew us both, and they'd ask, Hey, what happened with her? I politely and succinctly shift the topic. I just didn't want to keep revisiting a chapter that was so clearly over. It wasn't about hiding anything. I'd finally mastered the art of leaving her in the past. The last I heard, things weren't going well for her. She was still bouncing between her parents' house and friends' sofas, struggling to hold down a job. Every now and then, people I barely spoke to would message me, saying she was approaching everyone who would listen for help. A few even implied she hoped I might reconsider and decide to play father to her child after all. But that was never going to happen. I had invested too much time and effort into regaining my life to ever consider that path again, simply because her plans hadn't worked out. I wasn't going to be her safety net, or the one to pick up her pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I truly believe I received the closure I needed. She was coping with the repercussions of her own decisions, and me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on, not in a grand theatrical sense, but quietly, utterly content. And you know what? That was more than enough. So, I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, after all that betrayal and heartbreak, what would you have done when she showed up with that baby? Would you have found it in your heart to give her a second chance? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your perspective.